that's inevitably going to lead to a credit crisis, sooner or later. It's a demographic time bomb, and what you do is that you speed up the clock a little bit, knowing that the problem is there, by saying, well, you know what, let's make sure that these people retire a little bit earlier. And you can't undo it, without support from the European Central Bank. France and Italy would have gone bankrupt way sooner. They have become addicted to aid. If you help these governments by buying their bonds when the interest rate is already near zero or actually a little bit below zero, they lose the incentive to find ways to cut their budgets.
Welcome to the Microscopic Podcast presented by GoldRepublic. My name is Alexei Joranov, and in this format I invite you to look at the world through different lenses, to see what's hidden in plain sight. But before I start, I'd like you to know that if you open an account at GoldRepublic, you will receive 1 free gram of gold. Just click on the link in the description. Welcome to the Microscopic Podcast, Arno. The last time we spoke together was 2.5 years ago. That was in June 2023. It's been a while.
A lot has happened in between. Yeah,
a lot has happened, and we will definitely address those topics. So, for those viewers and listeners who have not seen this interview, maybe it's a good start actually, because we will follow up on that interview today. Namely, we will discuss the digital euro. The digital ID that also goes with it, and the economic situation, the monetary situation also in Europe. So that will be, let's say, the first angle, actually, the basis of all that, because it will explain also maybe the motives behind the digital ID and also the digital euro, and why now? Because we enter the second phase, but we will discuss this. So in our last discussion, you described the Eurozone as a monetary marriage without fiscal trust. I quote you on that. What in the past 2 years have validated that view, that you would say policymakers have done, or that would show that there has been cracks that either they have been able to plaster or that still are widening?
Well, what we've seen in these 2.5 years, at the time, government budgets were still influenced by the pandemic, you might say. And it was acceptable for countries to have large deficits. I mean, if there's a crisis, you don't start a discussion on accounting and bookkeeping, whatever. That's the general consensus. You see it again now with the war in Ukraine. People say it's been going on for 3 years. Donald Trump comes to Europe. He says, I want you to spend 5% of your GDP on mainly American weaponry. Only their factories can fill in these orders. And hey, there's a crisis. We should stop talking about budget deficits, etc. I mean, in a crisis, you don't talk about money. It's a repetition. But what has happened in between, what we know is that government budgets fail to bounce back from the pandemic levels, which is worrying. If you just look at the United States, for example, they have never they're actually in a lockdown now with respect to their government. That's how it works. They have a shutdown.
The longest shutdown, by the way, in history so far.
Yes, that's something that happens because they can't have an ordinary budget. In Europe, the European Union, France is the biggest problem child. I'm sorry to say so. 6% budget deficit continuously. They need to refinance 300 billion euro in debt year after year, and there's no improvement in sight. So it never stops. That's the whole point. Central banks, as a result, need to lower the interest rate. And that's what they've been doing. Although inflation is high, and asset markets are too healthy, you might say.
High, about 2%. That's still high, then, like,
yes.
About 2%. Okay.
as a rule of thumb, if you want to fight inflation, you need to have an interest rate that's at least the level of the core inflation, but preferably 2% point higher. It's the so-called Taylor rule. And if you simply make a graph of interest and inflation in the Netherlands since the start of the ECB, what we know for sure is that the central bank there's always the inclination to keep interest rates too low. So until the credit crisis, you could easily see that interest rates and inflation were moving together, meaning that central banks in general want to keep their interest rate low, their policy rate, so it's easier to invest, which it's clear why they want to do it. They want to foster a positive investing climate, good for employment, for business. On the other hand, if the interest rates are too low for too long, you will get inflation. That's why you could see that when inflation was about to move up, central bankers knew that it was going to happen and they intervened right before that. Central bankers are really intelligent. At least they have some really intelligent people. What happens at the start of the credit crisis is that you had a sudden drop of about 3% points in the interest rate, which is necessary because you want to fight the effects of the credit crunch. Only after that you can never bounce back. So interest rates were kept too low, and the reason is that if they were to go up, countries would immediately face new budgetary problems. Because if you run a budget deficit like France, you have to refinance your old debt, but you also need to pay an additional interest rate on newly issued debt. So you get a debt spiral, and that might cause the collapse of France. It's really bad, and it has happened before several times. It's not impossible. So what central banks do is that they keep the interest rate too low, and that causes inflation in countries like the Netherlands. And central bankers, at least in the European Union, in the Eurozone, they don't really care about it. So if you walk outside and we find a granny with a little bit of savings, let's say 10,000 euro, and a small pension, which isn't always linked to inflation, she is suffering from the inflation rate. Well, a central bank will say, well, I could help you out with a little bit with an interest rate hike, but I don't really want to do it because my other concern is prevent countries and banks from collapsing. And if you simply look at a graph, you make a graph from the interest rate and the inflation rate, and then in the Netherlands, you see that the central bank doesn't care about inflation, which was but that was the sole reason why they were created. Now they don't care anymore, because otherwise they would have raised the interest rate much more often. And what we see happening right now, which is something that really scares me actually, or I think that it is concerning, is that central banks at the start of the pandemic started creating a lot of money, monetary expansion, quantitative easing. In Europe it was called the Pandemic Emergency Purchasing Program. That caused a massive amount of inflation. Ukraine war doesn't help in that respect either. Let's make that clear. So eventually they started increasing the interest rate, but not to 17%. And we had a 17% inflation in the Netherlands. So theoretically, maybe interest rates should have followed. That would have meant a complete shutdown of the economy. I can understand why central banks didn't do that, but they accepted the inflation. After that, what they did after that is that way too soon, they started lowering the interest rates again, although inflation is still high. Inflation is still above 2%. It's sticky around 3%. They can't manage to get it back to 2%. And still, they are lowering the inflation rate. And they do that because they want to help countries like France and Italy refinance their debt. What I find worrisome is that despite of this recent decrease, you see the yield, the interest rate that France in effect has to pay on its debt is increasing.
And so now we're talking about the front end of the curve, the long end of the curve, or everything?
Let's say 10-year.
Okay.
That's the most commonly traded debt instrument. 10-year government yield from France. You see that it has a quite a spike around the credit crisis. Then it goes down because central banks start to intervene. And it even approaches zero, interestingly. Then at the start of the credit crisis, monetary intervention. So it drops, it even starts approaching zero a little bit more. Then in 2022, central banks have to do something about inflation. They do something, but not enough. Then the yield goes up to 4%. And after that, central banks start their quantitative easing again, you might say. They start lowering the interest rates. And at that point in time, France's yield doesn't decrease. And that means that the central bank has no influence anymore on those financial markets. Because people in the financial markets, people who would invest your pension money, they know that France is a liability, even though central banks have intervened. And that should make a French government bond more interesting relative to other investments. Still, people walk away from them because they know that there's little incentive to buy them. They prefer to buy American stocks, for example, which I understand. But that's a big problem. So if the central bank intervenes, lowers the interest rate, which should help France repay its debt, it doesn't happen. Right after that, France makes terrible decision. It's absolutely horrible. Once again, let's be clear here.
I am not my government.
No, I wanted to say something about me. I really love France. I go there every year, at least 2 or 3 times. I'm a francophile. I don't know. Yes, that's a real word, right? What they do amidst this turmoil, it's problems that are starting to brew. This is not good. This looks like a new credit crisis. I mean, numbers are very clear.
I'm talking about here timeline-wise, just to put in perspective. Dated, like that moment. It's now recently, the past.
Yes, if you look at the past 2.5 years, we have had a discussion in France about pensions. In France, people retire at 62. In the Netherlands, it's at 67. Same as in Germany, and the Germans are talking about increasing the pension age to 73. That means that if you that means that if you're a German or a Dutch tourist and you go to France, you have to work for 5 or 10 years longer than your French counterpart, so that you can pay for his retirement. If you want to make sure that the Eurozone breaks up in a violent and unpleasant manner, this is what you should do. These people, also in the Netherlands, they won't accept it because it is unacceptable.
Well, it's not very clear, I think, for, let's say, the average person out there either, that this is the case. Or is it, do you think? People are really see this as a very obvious difference.
Well, you can look at social media, for example. If there's an article about this in the Dutch media, you can see how people respond. And it's not really pleasant. And I can understand it, actually. And if this gap materializes and it becomes wider, then you will get all sorts of politicians that use it. People say, well, there's right-wing populism and it's a danger to our democracy and the Russians are funding it. No, absolutely not. It's problems within the Eurozone, between those countries. And right now, there's a new issuance of Eurobonds, common European debt, for defense purposes, they say. Well, there will be a new round. Mario Draghi has proposed this in his report on competitiveness. Make sure you invest a little bit more, or a little bit, hundreds and hundreds of billions year after year. If the money isn't there, we should borrow it. You can only borrow it if the interest rates are low. So central banks will have to lower the interest rates again, causing more inflation. I mean, in the short run, you can't create money out of nothing, out of thin air. It comes from somebody, and it means it's your grannies, and they will pay the price.
And also, I mean, I'm not sure how much of a factor it is, but if you look at also the balance sheet of the ECB, that has obviously at its peak it was around 70%, right, in the pandemic levels, and now it maybe went down to 60%, but still, it's still unwinding from a very, very high level. like there's no much more margin of actually increasing that balance sheet either and creating that money that you just.
And that's the whole problem. That's it. So yeah, it's some sort of an end game. You have a toolbox, literally just like a carpenter, and there's a certain problem, and you take one tool, and then the tool breaks down or whatever, or you can't use it anymore. Knife becomes blunt if you use it too often. There's no more tools. Remember that the quantitative easing in the shape of asset purchasing programs, they emerged when the interest rate was near zero. So in 2014, Mario Draghi said, as head of the ECB, he said, well, I will do whatever it takes to save the euro. But at that point in time, interest rates were already lowering. And if they are near zero, you get a zero lower bound problem, because you can't you can't stimulate anymore at a zero interest rate, because then you would get negative interest rates, and people will simply withdraw their money from the bank. That's why they started with the asset purchasing programs. The asset purchasing programs started at the point in time when the interest rates were near zero or were about to go under, go below the zero lower bound. If you can tell from now that the interest rate has been a little bit above 0%, that gives you room to sell off those assets, to do the opposite as purchasing assets for your asset purchasing program, and it will simply a balance sheet with bonds will automatically decrease, because you have a redemption date on them. And if you don't reinvest that money, your pile of debt, because people pay off their debts, your pile of debt will automatically decrease a little bit. That's what's happening. And if the ECB wants to stimulate right now, they can simply lower the interest rate. However, if there would be a next recession next year or whatever, later this year, probably next year, I don't know. It may be even completely unrelated to human policy. Let's say a supply shock, an earthquake somewhere, a supply problem.
Black swan event. Yeah.
Whatever. Black swan event, yes. Maybe another pandemic, I don't know. Then a central bank will start lowering the interest rates, typically 3 to 4%. That's what happens historically. Then you are at the zero lower bound level. The only thing that you can do after that is start purchasing assets again. Until a level that the central bank is as big as the entire economy. So that's where you're heading. So you have all these tools. You use all your tools time and again, and after that you find out that you run out of tools. And in the midst of this, France decides to make it worse by saying that they will not raise the pension level. And when they did it, when they made that decision and communicated it, you saw that the yields were spiking again. Because France, unlike the Netherlands, France has a very large unfunded liability problem. And an unfunded liability, it sounds difficult, but it's very easy to understand. What a politician can do is say, well, you know what, vote for me, I will give you free money. For example, when you retire. Well, if you have an entire country like France or Italy or Spain, or even Germany, for that matter, but not the Netherlands, we have a pension fund. Other countries don't have it. It's very interesting. What happens is that if you have a large group of people, you can sort of estimate how long you will have to support them. Because you can calculate, on average, if somebody is 65 and he retires, he will live for about 20 years. With a large group of people, you have those data readily available. And you know for how long you will have to support them with a certain income. And you can make very reliable projections on that. But in all honesty, that's what a lot of economists say, and I would say I agree with them, is that those liabilities should be added up to your stock of national debt. Because even if you don't want to talk about it, we have a baby boom generation, the people that were born between 1945 and 1960, during the reconstruction after the war. All those people will all retire in the coming years, if you think about it. So if you're born in 1960 and your retirement age is 65, then you will retire this year. This is an entire group of people, the largest cohorts, age cohorts within your population pyramid. It is the people born in that period. They will all retire, so they will be removed from the working age population, and the cohorts below them are very small. In the Netherlands, the number of 18-year-olds being right now is 30% lower than the number of 65 years old. And if you say, well, you know what, there's a crisis, there's a virus, there's Russians, or whatever, or climate, whatever. If you keep on saying, well, you know what, we should make it acceptable that there's more debt, that we run large budget deficits. I mean, come on, this is crisis. What you keep doing is that you make decisions that benefit the largest cohorts at the expense of an decreasing younger cohort. And that's inevitably going to lead to a credit crisis, sooner or later.
It's a demographic time bomb in a way.
It's a demographic time bomb. And what you do is that you speed up the clock a little bit, knowing that the problem is there, by saying, well, you know what, let's make sure that these people retire a little bit earlier. And you can't undo it, huh? You can do it the other way around. You can say to people, you know what, you should save more for your retirement. If you along the way find out that you have been too pessimistic about a certain financial projection, you might say, well, you know what, I told you that you should save, but actually you've been saving too much. You can take some money out of a pension fund and give it back to people. That's possible, but you can't do it the other way around. If you tell French people, for example, well, you haven't been saving enough for your retirement. Your retirement at the age of 64 or 65. You can't undo it at that point in time. The only sensible thing to do in France right now is increase the retirement age. That way you can mitigate the effects of not having saved enough. Instead of that, what the French people do is that they say, well, rather than doing the sensible thing or doing nothing, we're choosing a third option, which is making it worse. And that's completely unacceptable. That this will be, when this materializes, and there will be a next round of Eurobonds from 2027 on, people will have to repay the Corona bond thing. We have a Corona fund, 800 billion euro, which was mainly financed by Germany and the Netherlands. It will have to be repaid, and the Dutch will have to repay it. What happened with that Corona fund is that the Netherlands borrowed 45 billion euro, and we said, well, we have to show some solidarity with the people in Italy. Because in Italy, all these people are in hospitals during the pandemic. Well, the money, the 800 billion euro on a European level that was borrowed, of which 45 billion comes from the Netherlands, that money never went to healthcare, by the way. It's nothing to do with the pandemic or whatever. It was a pretext. What they did is that they gave money to Italy, and they had a construction contract. You can actually do that if you live in Italy. You say, what? I need you to fix my balcony or whatever, or make my house more energy efficient. Please send me a proposal. And if you both like the proposal, you can add 10% to that. So the construction work will simply charge you 10% more, and you will send an invoice for the 10% to the Corona fund, which was meant for healthcare. So this is a complete subsidy of people in Italy, which is fine probably, but the Netherlands, we have to borrow that money to give it to them, and then they will retire 5 years earlier than we do. At some point in time, it is a combination of a demographic, but also a political time bomb, and that's the latest thing that is happening. That you see that these governments, that they have become addicted to aid, and that's a problem with aid, also with development aid. If you help these governments by buying their bonds when the interest rate is already near zero, or actually a little bit below zero, once you are there, they lose the incentive to find ways to cut their budgets. You should have some sort of Elon Musk-like Doge organization that goes through all their accounts and say, okay, we can skip this and that, we can save some money here and there. And if you don't do that, you will get larger budget deficits. But then these deficits are financed at a 0% interest rate. And if nobody wants to buy French, Italian, Spanish bonds, then the ECB will show up and make it easier for them. And that's going to end at some point in time.
Sorry to interrupt this episode, but I'd like to tell you more about what we do at GoldRepublic. At GoldRepublic, we provide physical gold, silver, and platinum, fully insured, fully in your name, fully allocated, in top-tier vaults, securely saved in Amsterdam, Zurich, and Frankfurt. No paper promises, just real ownership, full transparency on your name. We are fully regulated and conduct regular independent audits of our vaults with more than 700 million euros of precious metals under custody and 70,000 investors that trust us in the last 15 years. Our top-rated app gives you full control. Track live prices, explore detailed charts, and buy or sell in just a few taps. Whether you're hedging against inflation, currency risks, or financial stability, at GoldRepublic, we offer real assets to safeguard your generational wealth. Yeah, and so this is a very good point because it was also like the one of the reasons that the spreads, right, the core and periphery spreads. So the core being France, Netherlands.
Interesting. France is also the
Germany. yeah, it still is because of its strong economy and still relatively strong economy and potential.
Yes.
And then the periphery, which we Italy
and Greece, even Italy shouldn't be in a periphery. They say because it's too big.
Yeah,
it is too big to fail. So. Oh, we had this problem in Portugal and Greece. Well, we can save them. It was actually Northern European banks that lent them the money, but that's the consensus. We could say, the Euro crisis, these smaller countries, but not Italy, let alone France. Mm. We can't bail out France and Italy like we did with Portugal and Greece.
But one could say that this spread that's been maybe like sustained for 25 years, this treatment of the one treatment of like one size fits none in a way from a monetary policy perspective, because of the different fiscal spending behavior of each and every nation, has created those spreads that have been very artificially suppressed, right? The credit spread between the yields of the, let's say, a Bund or like a French bond with an Italian or Portuguese or Italian one or Greek has been synthetically suppressed to the point where once this suppression cannot be sustained anymore, it will go wide open and crack up like the whole system.
That's it.
Yeah. And so that moment, what will trigger this moment of not being able to use that suppression tool anymore?
In all honesty, and let's be clear here, I don't know that. I don't have my magic sphere.
Let's be hypothetical about potential scenarios, maybe, of potential reasons.
A potential reason, a potential scenario, a clear scenario is if the European Union would continue this ridiculous, absolutely outrageous Donald Trump plan. That was extortion. So Donald Trump came to Europe and he said, well, you know what? You have to spend 5% of your GDP on
defense spending.
On defense spending.
Energy as well deals with
US. And you have to buy my energy, not produce your own. Just to be sure, it is completely impossible.
Sorry, because van der Leyen agreed, she said yes, but a lot of analysts and political analysts say, well, she said yes, but that doesn't mean anything really.
Well, that's interesting. So that now it becomes less clear what a yes or a no means. But you're right. What typically happens if you say, well, if you have an army like the Netherlands, on paper we have a mechanized brigade with tanks and heavy weapons. What they did is that they sold them all, and they said, well, we have a paper tank army. So if the Russians show up on our door, we send our paper army. And now they realized that it wasn't such a great idea after all. They said, well, you know what, then let's buy some more tanks. Well, it takes years to buy all this equipment. And as a rule of thumb, if you look at how defense spending work in your accounting system, is that an asset that you buy, a military asset, like a plane, like an airplane, it only influences your budget, your government budget, at the moment when it arrives. Which makes perfect sense, by the way. The rules were changed in 2014. We have a new set of accounting rules in the European Union. These rules make much more sense. I mean, think about it. Let's say if you own a taxi company, okay? You order a new car, and the new car will only arrive in 2 years. for some reason. I don't know why. It's a very special car, custom made, whatever. You will not get your car in 2 years. What you could do as a taxi company is that you wait for the car to arrive and then decide to sell it within actually another year. You thought, well, I ordered the car 2 years ago, turns out I don't need it, whatever, I'm going to sell it. Then you will automatically see that then it becomes a second-hand car and you will have to sell it at a discount. I mean, a second-hand car is always cheaper than a newly bought car, right? So it's an asset write-down. But the asset write-down can only occur at the moment when the vehicle has arrived. You can't just say, and that's a spending that goes into your government accounts. And you can't just say, well, you know what, I would like to have some more write-down costs so that my budget deficits increase because Donald Trump told me to do that. No, it doesn't work that way. You will only get these write-downs on goods once they have arrived. And if you order a jet fighter and it takes 10 years to deliver, then you'll only see those write-downs on the capital formation. That's how they treat it under the European accounting system. You can look it up. It's Article 129B, by the way, if you don't believe me.
Such a machine.
I'm sorry for that, but it's a capital formation. But if you pursue on this path, you will have to buy a ridiculous amount of second-hand American equipment. And since governments like France already have budget deficits of 5 to 6%, and you want to add another 5% to that, well, you will definitely trigger a next credit crisis. The good news is that the Donald Trump deal was so ridiculous. It is so impossible. I mean, how ridiculous is it? Think about it. You say, well, we have a situation with regard to healthcare. Oh no, sorry, the military. We need to spend some money. How much? Any ordinary citizen would say, well, you know what? I'm going to make a shopping list. I'm going to talk to the experts, to the military. I say, we have a shopping list. This is what we need. And then you'll see what the approximate price tag is. And then you go look for good alternatives in the market. Rather than doing that, which is what any sane person would do in all circumstances, under all circumstances, what they do is, well, we don't care about what we buy, where we buy it, what the quality is, as long as there is a minimum invoice amount. That's really strange if you think about it. If you could say, for example, the Netherlands has to buy tanks, heavy equipment, but we have a terrible personnel shortage because of this demographic collapse. It would make perfect sense to say, you know what, we can buy a number of tanks and equipment, but let's make sure that if it arrives in 10 years, we at least have enough people to be driving all those vehicles. Because if those people aren't being born, if they haven't been born 10 years ago, they will not be there in 10 years. I mean, let's say if you're 20 and you join the military. So the stuff that's going to be abundant probably shouldn't be bought in the first place because we're on the verge of a new credit crisis. That would make total sense. Anybody who makes business decisions will think like that. Mm-hmm. And then the European Union said, well, that would not under normal circumstances make sense. However, Donald Trump, the failed real estate investor, I mean, he says he's the deal maker, but he got his money from daddy. And I'm not jealous with it. He's the CEO of my dad's money company. If he tells you to spend 5% of your economy mainly on American weaponry, which is a good deal from his perspective, the European Union should absolutely have said, we're not going to do this. And what I know from behind the scenes, let's put it that way, that everybody knows, including him, Trump, that Europe isn't going to make this anyway, for the obvious reason that you can't scale up production in such a short time range. Oh, and by the way, if you would like to increase government spending on the military, and you want to do it now, you want to make sure that your expenses go up right now within this fiscal year. It's very simple. You take all your police and military personnel, and you double their salaries. Makes their job more attractive. Mm-hmm. It can help you fight shortages, recruitment problems, and they spend the money in their own economy, which is right here. So if you actually cared about the military in the first place, rather than seeing it as a way of making money, but if you would care about soldiers and policemen and the Royal Constabulary in the Netherlands, military police, paramilitary forces, and the problems that they face, talk to them. They all say we have personnel shortages. Address that by giving them the money. If you really care about it, you would have given them the money rather than buy American crap. Same thing as during the pandemic. Said, hey, we need to mobilize 800 billion euros for the healthcare workers. In the Netherlands, we called them the healthcare heroes, and we started clapping on the road when they passed by. It's really insane if you think about it, and they started doing little crazy dances in hospitals. But if you talk to these people, talk to doctors, talk to nurses, they say, same as in the military, that's a demographic collapse, we need more colleagues. We don't need your applause. We don't need a corona fund so you can give subsidies to Italian construction workers for jobs that they didn't perform in the first place. It's a cesspool of corruption, the corona fund. They said, no, please give us some money so we can improve the salaries and have more colleagues. I mean, you are clapping for us, right? And now everybody's talking about the military. If you really do care about these people, give them the money. Why doesn't it happen? Well, anyway, if you do this, if you pursue this path, if you continue down this road, you are asking for a credit crisis. That's very certain. But I don't know when it's going to happen. But what everybody agrees on is that without support from the European Central Bank, France and Italy would have gone bankrupt way sooner. And they would have had to restructure their government budgets internally, find new ways of health tax, wealth tax, not health, wealth tax, whatever, you can do that actually. I mean, if you look at Italy, they have 11 trillion in assets. And their government budgets, their government debt is over 3 trillion. What you could theoretically do is that you take 1/3 of the wealth of all rich Italians and you use that to repay their debt or whatever. You could organize it internally if you really wanted to, but they don't want it because they don't feel the urge to do so, pressured by financial markets. Because whenever something happens, the central bank will solve their problems. Central banker is always somebody from Italy or from France. I think that's outrageous in itself. It should have been a Dutchman or at least somebody from Northern Europe. Otherwise you get a Latin currency union and you keep on spending and you keep on spending. And what we see now is that their tools are getting really blunt because financial markets charge France more for borrowing while the marginal lending facility is actually decreasing. So they diverge. That's a really unhealthy signal. It's like a doctor noticing that his or her patient, let's be gender inclusive, let's say that her patient is suffering from a fever, temperature goes up, so she increases the dose of a certain medication, but still the fever goes up. You say, hey, I'm trying to give you this medication, but it doesn't work. That's exactly what's happening right now in the Eurozone. So you are on the verge of a certain credit crisis. Knowing that, what you do is that you spend another few trillion on Donald Trump. We have the Draghi proposition, the competitiveness fund.
It's another trillion.
That's another trillion. And then we have the green transition. There's actually there's a study committee, and it's in the Netherlands, and it's organized by all the cabinets. So it means that all ministries like finance, defense, healthcare, whatever, they all send one envoy plus the vice president of the Dutch Central Bank. They have a small committee, and so you could really trust them, and they advise our government. And it's a report. They call it responsible budgeting, and the responsible budgeting committee says we are demographically speaking, we are in trouble because all these people will retire. The Netherlands has a relatively good pension system, especially if you compare it to France or Italy or Germany. But still, there's a lot of pay-as-you-go expenditures, which means that the government says, well, you're 65 or 67, I give you an allowance, monthly allowance. How will I pay for it as a government? I don't know. I think that should be added up to your government debt, obviously. If you would do that in the entire Eurozone, so all these pay-as-you-go pension liabilities, they amount to about 300 to 5 to 600% of your national income. And I would like you to think about that for a second. If you look at the outstanding debt of France, I should have memorized. I believe it's 120% in France right now.
Debt to GDP.
Debt to GDP ratio. Because, you know, there's a bunch of outstanding government bonds. 300 billion euro needs to be refinanced every year. They have a 5% government budget, a negative budget. So it adds up and it adds up. So the amount of debt that you see, that's legally there, that's money issued, bearer bonds, that's 120%. That's a problem. We know for certain, we know for a fact that right now people are retiring in France at an alarming rate. That's your collapsing population pyramid. And if you would look at all these pay-as-you-go pensions, which was very easy to promise years ago, you said, as if you're a social democrat or a socialist, you say, you know what, vote for me, I will give you free money. Well, how are you going to pay for that? Well, I don't care, let's see in the future. Well, the future is now. So above that, on top of that 120%, in the case of France, you should add some 500% of liabilities with respect to retirement. In the Netherlands, on top of that, we also have the green transition because we want to transform our economy to a 100% electric economy, which requires an electric infrastructure that isn't there. And the budget committee for responsible, or the Committee for Responsible Budgeting in the Netherlands, including the current president of the Dutch Central Bank, Olaf Slijpen. He used to be vice president, that's why he was in that committee, but now he's the president of the Dutch Central Bank. So I'm not saying something that's out of the ordinary or whatever. Everybody who knows a little bit of accounting can see these problems mounting. So you have your Corona fund that needs to be repaid from 2027. Then you have all these additional budget deficits because large countries never rebalance their finances. Then you have this crazy Trump idea, and I hope that it will simply fail and that there's time. Maybe I mean, in two or 3 years he's gone, and then you can reverse it. Then the damage can be stopped. But at least there's that. Then you have the green transition. Then you have your demographics, and
very low GDP growth. I mean,
and very low GDP.
We're hovering at 1.5 on the EU level.
So you can't outgrow your problems. At some point in time, you will have to make, and it's going to happen soon. You need to make very large, unpleasant decisions. You need to scrap a lot of expenditure, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt people, but you know it will happen, and it's. We had an interesting discussion. We had Bayrou. He was the prime minister in France.
Very, very short prime minister.
Yes, exactly. He actually tried to do that, and he says, "Well, it's ridiculous. Look at our financial situation. We have been borrowing money to promise a happy lifestyle to the boomers, to the baby boomers after the Second World War, but now we have to pay for it." Everybody was angry. He said, "How can you say that? Let's lower the retirement age." I said, "No, what are you doing?" But that's it. But he was honest about it. And he understood that he had to make unpleasant sacrifices and unpleasant decisions. And if you don't do that, and I don't know exactly when it's going to happen, but the Trump plan is really a massive trigger, because you can't pay 5%, you can't spend 5% of your economy on defense, maybe 3.5 in years if you allow it to grow. I mean, if you're falling short of your recruitment goals right now in the Netherlands, we have an army that is supposed to be on paper 70,000 people strong. It's not even 55,000. And they say, let's increase the recruitment target to 200,000 soldiers. In times of a collapsing population pyramid, everybody knows you're not going to make it. But if you don't hire those people, then you obviously don't have to pay them
the salary.
The salary. So people, a lot of people think, well, it will just pass. But if what they have agreed upon is that the amount of money from 3.5% to 5% can be spent on defense-related stuff, like what Italy or what Spain has proposed is a climate allowance for victims. So if you live in Spain, you're a victim of climate change. That's how they see it, and they say we should be able to increase government borrowing so we can give people free money because of the climate.
Interesting.
Which you can't finance because it's an out of pocket. I mean, it's gone. If you do that, you can be in favor of such a system. I mean, politically anything goes. But what they said, what the European Commission has said, well, that's very good. If you do that, well, under normal circumstances, it wouldn't be allowed for Spain to run a too large a deficit. But they said, well, because Mr. Trump was here and we said 5% and it's climate, just spend the money. That's definitely another trigger. If you start wasting money like that without knowing how to repay it. So there's a bunch of those triggers in the coming 24 months that really don't look good. And then as a rule of thumb, central banks will intervene, lower the interest rates. When it hits zero, the other option is quantitative easing, start another purchasing program. Then you call it the safety purchasing program or the climate purchasing or the healthcare, whatever. Money never went to healthcare. This money will never go to the soldiers who deserve it because soldiers work hard. And you should look up what they earn. It's I call it obscene. The meager pay. That's a bunch of triggers. And then the ECB, because the ECB has a problem. The ECB needs central bank digital currency, but they don't have it yet. They will only have it in 2029.
Yeah.
If they at least they hope so. So before that, they have the zero lower bound problem. And then they can only start another purchasing program that will have a certain effect on alternative assets such as gold, for example. So, but I do have to repeat, I don't want people to buy gold because they hear me saying this. I'm not giving you investment tips or whatever. You should really look into your own situation and don't buy anything you don't understand. Also with crypto and stock and Bitcoin or whatever, but in general, then you'll see people fleeing to those alternative assets.
Yeah, well, we've definitely noticed that at GoldRepublic. That
I thought you, yes,
for sure. I mean, we had a record amount of people that rushed towards buying gold, silver, precious metals in general. But
yes.
I want to have your take maybe towards the end on that. But that's definitely now a transition also to the other topic that we want to discuss is obviously the digital euro. So as you just mentioned, they are going to plan to release the digital euro as of 2027 with the first implemented pilots and 2029 as the deadline as fully finished products, fully implemented and out there. But let's first talk about the research phase. The research phase was between 2021 when we actually started speaking up until October 2025, more or less. That was a preparation phase. The initial research phase was until 2023. Then from 2023 to today, October 2025, there was the preparation phase. So they delivered a draft, a rule book, a prototype infrastructure, right? Where
yes, that's a smoke screen.
Interviewed 1,000 of people about input, tested offline transactions and privacy measures, which were without a surprise, maybe one of the most important points that people would vouch against the digital euro. And they prepared to have the rollout of the pilot in 2027. And the estimated cost is about 1.3 billion euros
Yeah, that's
just
peanuts.
to launch
That's
with
peanuts.
an annual about 300.
If you look at the other amounts we just mentioned, 1.3 billion,
This is fairy dust. Fairy dust. This is nothing.
Sorry for that. We don't have it, but right now it's...
Yeah, and then a quarter of a trillion, a quarter of a billion, so 320 million yearly operational costs. And those are just estimates, and we all know that estimates precede much more than actual spending is much higher than that. If you build a house,
cost overruns,
the estimate of building a house never matches the actual estimate.
I'm going to use that as a quote from you somewhere.
Yeah.
The estimates always precede cost overruns.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Alexei, Jordan. I don't know if somebody else has. Let's look at Wikiquote or something. You have these websites, but otherwise it's yours.
It's here. It's marked now.
But you're right. But that's not the point here. These amounts are really low.
And so my point is more of so this is a bit of a context more that they emphasize, and this is one maybe of the biggest arguments now on a strategic level of the European monetary sovereignty. And we've just talked about the fact that the ECB, the European Union in general, is not able to control its monetary, or let's say it this way, its debt markets, right? That there's a problem over there. And that if on top of that, there's then external, let's say, influence with payment providers like Visa and PayPal, Visa that has been sold. Back then there was a Europe Visa that's been sold to the American entities.
Yes. That's it. The European banks used to own.
Exactly, and
they sold it.
And so that is exactly. And so
that's like selling your tanks and then saying you're about to be invaded.
Yeah, and then you need them back, and then we buy them for a higher price.
Yes.
Yeah. And now the pretext is that this digital euro is also for reasserting the little left of European sovereignty over that part. What is then your take on that? Knowing that all of that is either, as you said, a smokescreen?